Hi, my name is Steve Robbins, and I'm the president of BPMA. I'd like to welcome you here tonight. Really psyched that you could be here for this first online event that we're running. We're going to jump to the very first slide, and I'll go through a few introductory comments very briefly. We'll go to the next slide. Thanks. So we'll go back a slide, and we'll stop right here. So at BPMA, we are all about helping people to literally transform the trajectory of their careers. And we do that with learning that inspires in a very welcoming community. And I've got to say that probably at no time in my entire career has that been more important than it is right now, because we're all facing a lot of different changes. And BPMA is in a very unique position to help you to weather the storm that's going on out there. Now, on an ongoing basis, we have monthly events. We do a lot of work with career development. We have the Product Executives Forum, which should be very interesting if you are on this online event tonight. In fact, our next event is going to be an online discussion that's going to be taking place on this Friday morning. And if you're interested in learning more, please send please let us know. And we also have mentorship programs and a blog and a whole lot more. BPMA, we'll go to the next slide. BPMA would not be possible without the support of a lot of different organizations. So, I've jumped ahead a little bit, but the other thing that I wanted to mention is that BPMA, as I've already talked about, has a lot of ongoing events. We have great content on our blog. We have a robust mentorship program. If you're a product leader, I would encourage you to have people on your team participate in that. Or if you'd like to help mentor other people in the community, I hope that you'll take advantage of that. I already mentioned the Product Executives Forum, or PEF. Our next meeting will be on this Friday. And we also work very closely with a few different organizations that are partners of ours, very close partners, including Agile Product Open, or APO, Women in Product, and Product Camp Boston. Now we'll go to the next slide. So BPMA would not be possible without the support of a bunch of different sponsors and partners. You can see a list here. All of these folks, many of these folks are continuing to have programs. They've just moved online. So I would encourage you to take a look at their websites, learn more about what they do and how they can help you to weather the storm as well. Other piece I want to mention is that I was talking with Larry Kahn from NDT today. He's one of our sponsors. And he asked me to mention something that I think is very helpful to know, which is that they're actually starting to see new jobs coming in. And they've been posting those new jobs to their website every few days. They've got a lot of different client candidates, or a lot of different clients that are continuing to interview candidates even right now. So whether you're considering a new opportunity or you're actively looking, I would encourage you to look at NDT's website at ndt.com. And with that, next slide. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Charlie. I want to say one last thing. Again, to remind you that at BPMA, we are all about helping you to weather this storm and how to be successful even in these changing times. We've sent out a survey to anybody that's on our mailing list. I hope that you filled it out. If you haven't, you still can. But I hope that you'll continue to look to BPMA for additional guidance and suggestions and opportunities to continue to build a strong product management and product marketing community here in Boston. Because we're not only here to support you when we can do it in person, we're also here to support you at times like this, when networking and learning from other people in the products field has never been more important. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie. Charlie?
Hello, I'm Charlie Farrison. I'm the co-director of programming here at BPMA. And I'd like to mention that our next event in April is Product Management for That Startup Life. Our presenter, Sam Clemens, is going to be talking about what specific skills product managers need for a startup context and how to think about if that's something you'd like to do in your career working at a startup as a product manager, what kind of skills are needed and how to pick a startup that is a good fit for you. Next slide, please. So here are a couple tips for today's virtual event. First off, mute yourself. That's the default when you sign in, so hopefully you're already muted. Please do turn off your video for this portion of the event. That'll just help with bandwidth. At the very end of the event, we're going to have virtual networking via the platform Remo, which is pretty exciting. And so for that, you'll be able to turn your audio and video on, meet other product folks who have attended this event, talk about what you've learned, what kind of challenges you're facing at your work. Really excited for that portion of the event after our panel. And then if you can take a moment now to go to slido.com and enter this code, that's going to allow you to be able to submit questions throughout the event for the panel of speakers. The way this event's going to go is we're going to have a few different speakers presenting, and during that collecting questions via Slido, and then we'll have a panel moderated by Bruce McCarthy in which those questions from the audience will get answered. Next slide, please. So here are the amazing speakers we have for you today. Again, the Slido code is on this slide, so please do go use your phone or computer to access Slido and have that available so that when you have a question, you can easily put it in there for Bruce to see. So we've got Catherine Wellman and Sharon Gardanier, who are both at Cambridge Mobile Telematics, VP of Product and VP of Engineering. We have Bruce McCarthy, founder of Product Culture and co-author of Product Bootcamps Relaunched, and Evan Ryan, who's also a co-author of that, and also General Manager of Visual Media at Wayfair. We have Charlie Baker, Senior Director of Product Management and Strategy at Oracle. And we have Pete Belanti, Chief Product Officer at Repsly. So lots of great speakers for you today and excited to launch into this. Again, make sure you go to slido.com, code P287. All right, next slide, please. And with that, Catherine and Sharon, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'm just going to share some of our story, and Sharon is going to pick up a couple of the slides. I'll talk through the first couple, and then she'll join in. But essentially, Cambridge Mobile Telematics is a smartphone telematics company. We basically provide smartphone telematics and analytics to insurers, ride-sharing companies, and fleets. Essentially, this means that we collect sensor data from smartphones and we analyze it for driver performance. And then we provide that driving risk information as well as to our partners, that is insurance companies and ride sharing and fleets. We also provide feedback to drivers within a mobile app so to motivate them and encourage them to improve their driving behavior. If you go to the next slide. So along these lines, we were founded essentially in 2010. We did a lot of work on the technology for a number of years with probably only about 3 or 4 or 5 employees at that time. We started to grow a little bit more in 2014. By 2016, when I joined, we had 30 employees. And during that year, we grew a little bit more. At that time, basically engineers were organized by technical discipline. And what we're going to talk a little bit about today is essentially how we evolved over time and how we've tried to accommodate the increase in size in our business and how we've to ensure that from a product management as well as engineering management and development perspective, we're still as efficient as we were back at the beginning in 2012. So in 2016, we had about 30 employees and we grew a little bit more then. At that time, we were small enough so that engineers were organized by technical discipline. And for our particular product platform, this involves a mobile SDK, software development kit, as well as apps, right, for collecting the sensor data as well as providing feedback to drivers within the apps. We also have a cloud component or platform where basically the data gets collected in the mobile app. It gets passed to the cloud for analysis. And then we have data science work that gets done on that data. We also have an IoT device that can be implemented or affixed to the windshield of the car, and it can communicate with the mobile app. And as a result, there's just another discipline there. So our engineers were organized by these different disciplines because obviously they had expertise in these different areas. Also, the product people at the time, there were only a few of us. And not only were we product managers trying to think about the roadmap, trying to think about new features and functionality and define those for the engineers, but we were also what we call program managers in the sense that we were the people who interacted with customers. We were the people that helped them through implementing our technology for their particular business. And so there was a lot of sort of work that spanned the product group at that time. And as I mentioned earlier, our engineers, while they were organized by technical discipline, our products actually spanned these disciplines. And so there was a lot of cross-functional work that was being done in order to produce a particular product release. Since then, we've grown substantially. So by the summer of 2019, last summer, we were about 150 employees. Today, we're closer to about 180. And given that original structure organization of our engineers and our product group became sort of insufficient for supporting our needs. And as a result, we faced a number of challenges. So for example, as I mentioned, our resources were not aligning with products. They were really much more aligned with technical discipline. And as a result, it was hard to coordinate resources across products for product releases, across disciplines for a product release. Also, our engineers ended up doing a lot of context switching, which became very inefficient, right? So they were trying to do work for a particular product feature, one product feature, but then they would switch and try to do work for a different product feature for a very different product. And as a result, it was just very inefficient. Also, it was very difficult to track and actually predict the product release dates. And that was difficult to then be able to share with our customers and our market. You go to the next slide. So given all of these challenges, we decided at the end of last summer, and this is about the time that Sharon actually joined CMT, we decided to reorganize the engineers and the product group to be able to create what we call squads. And squads are organized by product or a project. Sometimes we have internal projects that aren't necessarily customer facing. But essentially the squads, are focused around a particular product. And we have a couple of squad leaders. One leader is from the product group and one leader is from the engineering group. Each squad has dedicated resources across engineering groups. So the engineering groups from different technical disciplines are assigned to a given squad for a given product. And so basically they all focus on this one product together. And this includes both QA as well as I mentioned earlier, a product manager. So the product manager is associated with the squad, and therefore they can then help manage the roadmap for that particular squad. And then ultimately the goal of creating these squads and switching to this new organization was to improve our focus and increase our efficiency in terms of productivity. Also, we wanted to give the engineers a little bit more ownership of a given product and the features and releases associated with that product. And then finally, we were really trying to be able to enable our organization to adhere to a particular release schedule. So being able to predict and estimate, when are we going to release this new version of a given product, and then actually march towards that date and adhere to that release schedule. So those were our goals, and now I'll hand it over to Sharon. Sharon's going to talk a little bit about, how that has evolved since the end of the summer, and how we're moving forward since then.
Thanks, Catherine, for your great explanation of where we were and where we've come. Can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, you did already. Thank you. So the real power of the squads comes from the independence and autonomy. Previously, when you had a set of functional groups like data science or mobile or cloud, with a manager each trying to understand the deliverables for many, many different kinds of projects, it creates a logjam and we're not able to scale. But by pivoting over to squads, which are more like, projects, and having a product owner and a technical lead for each one of those squads, then all of a sudden you have this small group, cross-functional group, that's able to run their own sprints. All squads have their own Jira boards, do their own sprint planning, do their own stand-ups, and basically prioritize and assign tasks themselves. It relieves a lot of pressure off that functional manager, who can then focus on improving the capability of all the engineers in their group, and onboarding and administrative tasks, instead of trying to keep track of 10 or 12 or 20 different projects. We also have all the squads, when we're not practicing working from home and social distancing, we have all the squads co-located, and that encourages cohesion. It encourages the engineers and the product owners to talk to one another. Issues can be resolved very quickly, and there's some camaraderie that builds up. Also, all the people in the squad understand the challenges and understand what the goals and the vision are for that squad. So instead of one person assign a number of JIRAs across a bunch of different projects, which would be in the old method, with the squads, we all know what our milestones are. We all know what the vision is. We all know what the responsibilities are of the squads. And with independence, sometimes comes a little bit of too much siloing. So we also have a system for oversight. As Catherine talked earlier, our product consists of a lot of different pieces: the mobile, the cloud, the data science. And so there is a way that everything has to work together. Some squads provide infrastructure which get used by other squads. So therefore, there's a system of councils. We have the R&D council to resolve priority conflicts. Say squad A is behind in their roadmap, and what they're working on is higher in priority than the next milestone for squad B. The R&D council can then temporarily or even permanently reassign engineers from one squad to another, so that the overall strategic goals of the organization then are met. The data council reviews all the analyses from various squads to ensure that there's a high level of quality, that the algorithms are sound and based on good science, and also that our data governance and privacy policies are being followed well. And that's very important to us. Finally, the Architecture Council reviews our designs and ensures that the kinds of templates and patterns and designs are shared amongst squads, so that we don't have, squad C developing the same kinds of modules that squad D is developing. The Architectural Council has an overview and is able to ensure reuse and cohesion and common patterns. So that's what we ended up with, a balance between independence and autonomy and oversight and guidance. However, not everything works perfectly, and we did have to go through some refinements. And please go to the next slide. So the issues that we found: when you have a number of different squads all working towards their own roadmaps, sometimes if squad A needs something from squad B, it doesn't get into their sprint planning on a predictable basis. So the process for resolving dependencies was a bit murky. We also have other groups that function more like service organizations, like DevOps and support. And they found themselves being surprised with urgent requests and not included in the planning process. And it was not always clear what squad owns a particular task that may come in. So the refinements that we made, senior leadership Catherine and I and the architects, Matt Levine, sat with each of the squads and we developed their mission statements and charter, which gave clear or pretty clear delineation about which squads were responsible for what project. Now, for the squads which were responsible for a particular product, that's more clear. But squads which are responsible for pieces of infrastructure, that sometimes was less clear. So the mission statements are really important. We also recently instituted inter-squad planning meetings. So that gives a forum to resolve dependencies across teams, include DevOps and support and planning, and not always be escalating things to the R&D Council, but having a discussion so that if I need, if I'm in Squad A and I need something from Squad D, that we can talk about it and make sure that it's included in our prioritization. So this inter-squad planning meeting doesn't include every single engineer from every single squad. It's only the squad leadership, which means the technical lead and the product owner. So we found that that is helping quite a bit as well. And finally, providing more structure for squads. Not only do we need mission statements and charters, but it's helpful to have unified process and more structured documentation. For example, design documentation, templates, weekly reporting we have in place, unified process, the way we do code reviews, all of these things, they have a structure that's used by all the squads. Then no squad has to invent process for their own use. And so as we keep on evolving this structure, I'm sure we'll add more and more refinements to it. But right now, we feel that we have a very well-functioning team. And it's a bit different than a usual matrix organization because of the autonomy of the squads. But we're pretty proud of what we've done and feel it positions us very well to grow into the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon and Catherine, for presenting about Cambridge Mobile Telematics. And our next speaker, if you go to the next slide, is Charlie Baker from Oracle. And again, if you have any questions for Sharon or Catherine or for the panel in general, definitely go to slido.com, code P287, and put in your questions so we can ask them to the panel. Charlie, take it away.
Thanks, Charlie. We wanted to put two Charlies back to back here talking. We're made it more confusing for everybody, but that's okay. You go to the next slide, please. Nobody wants to look at me. So I just wanted to put one thought together. And it's great to see everybody here in this virtual world and trying to figure out more about what we can do to grow our teams and how to have higher performing teams. As I thought about this question and the prompt of how do you build high performing product management teams, a lot more questions came to mind, right? What phase are you in the overall company's life cycle? How big is it? Where's the product life cycle you're trying to be part of? And as I wrote down my notes, I came away with these 4 big concepts of looking back at my career and being at really small companies and startups, trying to get funding through where I'm at now with Oracle, where I'm part of a 130,000 person organization. The piece of the business that I'm focused on today is about the cloud infrastructure components. So it's very high tech. There's a lot of pressure on timeliness to deliverables, and we do a lot of things in a very big way. So the scope of where you're looking at, building this team and bringing in talent, started to come to mind of if it's just me and 6 other guys in a company, we're going to do this one way. But now where I'm at, where we're in bigger teams and there's more specificity of the roles, what do you do differently? So that's the way I reflected on the question and wanted to frame this up. I came back to the organization structure and the definition of roles was the first place I needed to start as I look back at all the different jobs. And I think they were just talking about that in the last presentation. Shannon was talking about it, where you have to almost step back and say, what's the overall organization structure look like? How are we trying to function as an entire business? And then if we're functioning this way as a business, how do we fit product management into that structure? Is it very squad oriented? We're organized right now very much in service teams and then grouping service teams together. So we have these concepts of a service owner and a business owner. And the service owner is the engineering leader that really is responsible for all the operations of running that service. It's true DevOps model. There's people on call who wrote the code. And then the business owner is the product management side, where we're really looking at trying to understand where do we need to take the business? How do we prioritize the requirements? What's the intake process for feature requests look like from the field? And just making sure we have alignment of where does each role stop, right? Who works with who? How does the structure work overall? We don't put our product managers inside of our engineering teams. We have a separate product management organization that we're all in. There's benefits to that, where we look at aligning the goals of the business and really looking at things in a, what's happening with the overall business perspective. And then there's downfalls where the engineering leader feels like, well, this product manager needs to be dedicated to me. And is that the right thing to do all the time? And that goes to that question of, if I have a really strong product manager and want to grow them, can I pigeonhole them into one service and keep them there? Will I be able to keep them long term and grow a team that's functional? Or am I just going to have a product manager who I make an expert in a particular technology? They're really good at their job, but the way that they see growth is by leaving the company to get a bigger role somewhere else, because we didn't create an organizational structure that they could grow into in the future. So, where's the product focus? Where's the service focus? How are the teams structured? And then creating alignment across the business, I think, was the first concept that I walked away with. The second, you could see in the last presentation very well. Every product management role I've been in and team that we've grown has been a strong partnership with engineering. Get that basic agreement on the structure. I get the engineering teams to buy in 100% on the interview process. Bringing in a product manager who's going to work in a particular role, and they're going to be basically almost dotted line reporting philosophy into engineering in a lot of the models. Then that engineering leader has to be 100% bought in that it's the right product manager to work on those products. Any doubt in that, it has to be a really strong candidate to get over the hump there. So we do treat it like that. The product managers are grouped together, but the way that we make sure we're successful is we share responsibility for the direction of that product manager's path day to day. I encourage my engineering leaders to have more than weekly syncs with the product management. And they have different strategies for prioritizing work that we all work together on. The next concept I've just seen for the product management teams to keep them high performing is that experience and expertise matter. And the first comment is just that if you're going to have a situation where you're bringing in product managers to a team and you want to have a place where they can grow, you have to be very careful about when you're making a stretch hire and when you're bringing in an expert. And I found that the stretch hires, the people who might not have the right tech but are great product managers, or experience level isn't quite where it needs to be, we've had to support them with larger teams and give them more support and give them mentors. And it hasn't been successful when you have that stretch hire who you think can go do the job, but you don't give them the support to actually grow them into the role. You don't give them the methodology for the technical training. Probably more on me as a leader to not be able to emphasize how to grow those people and put them into the right positions. But it's definitely something I've noticed over time in my team and other teams, where hiring matters in building that team and making sure that you're getting the right expertise. And a lot of times I find looking within the organization is a great place to start. And this is part of that career pathing and organization structure as well. SEs and SAs, solution engineers, solution architects are great, to fill some of these roles. And then the last concept of keeping the teams rolling and putting them together, career path absolutely matters. And every discussion that I've been having with people that we've been hiring and members of the team, especially in this environment, we're having a lot of discussions about where they want to take their career and where do they want to grow. Do they want to be a manager of people? Do they want to be a manager of products? Do they want to be an architect someday? Are they that technical? They want to go on that side. It's that career talk that starts at day one, and then explaining to them from the start about the organization structure and where you want to take it, and that you're going to take their career and help align it to that organization. and show them a path for when it makes sense, right? If you're lucky enough to be at a company where you can promote someone and you can get them a title, you can get them to a director of product management position and not have to worry about them having direct reports yet. That's one way to get promotions in there. But if you want somebody who has leadership skills, you want them to be a manager, you have to organize your team and give them opportunities to lead so you can make them the next leader in product management, have direct reports with them, and continue to show them growth on that path as well as the expert on the product side. So those are the thoughts I had as I looked at building high performing teams. And it's a lot about structure. It's a lot about buy-in from engineering. And it's a lot of transparency with the people that you're working with to make sure they understand this is the way the team's structured today. Here's where we want it to be in the future. We want it to be here because it aligns with our business goals and our business structure going forward, and then challenge them to give you those opportunities. So Charlie, I'll let you transition from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie. And next, we're going to have Pete Belanti with Repsly.
Great. Thank you.
And remember, take a look at Slido. There's a way to upvote other people's questions, even if you don't have a question yourself.
Great.
Take it
Thank
away,
you.
Pete.
Thank you, Charlie. And Charlie, I hope my audio is coming through okay.
Yes.
Excellent. But yeah, brief introduction. Hi, this is Pete Belanti from Repsly, Chief Product Officer there. You can go to the next slide. Actually, well, maybe we're missing the one, but just a quick brief on who Repsly is and what we do. Repsly is a retail execution platform. So we're a SaaS solution for brands, companies like Kraft Heinz and Vita Coco and lots of other name brands you might recognize that are in various retail stores. One of the many problems we actually help to solve is out of stocks. So if you're seeing that in your stores today, it's very likely that there's a field execution team, possibly supported by Repsly, that's working on that problem today. So, but what I thought I'd do for this presentation, I promised Steve I would keep it under 5 minutes. I'll see if I can do that. And I just want to talk about two case studies, real world examples of companies I've worked with that we're looking at ways to organize their product management teams for specific business outcomes, problems they were trying to solve. Both of these examples were growth stage companies, so they weren't startups, but they weren't global enterprises like Oracle. They were more on the size of what Catherine and Sharon were talking about with Cambridge Telematics in terms of the size of the company and the problems that they were trying to solve. The first one should sound pretty familiar because it's very similar to what Cambridge Telematics worked on, which was, in our case, we called it T-shaping the product teams. And you can go to the next slide. I'm just going to kind of present a before and after, and so you can get a feeling for what the business case was. But the before functional organization for this company was, very similar to what you just heard, where the teams were organized really more around technology platforms as opposed to actual products that were being created. So in a SaaS product, there were mobile applications, there were web applications, and so forth. And each team kind of functioned as sort of a job factory. They specialized in one area, jobs came in, and they would push those out, and then ultimately QA team would kind of catch things at the end. And they were great teams. Actually, they were very very technically proficient. You can actually go to the next build, in the sense that Chris, you can hit next there. Yeah, they would produce releases, pretty much regularly. They had high degrees of quality in what they produced. You can go to the next slide also, or next build anyway. And the pros were that they could do some pretty complex things. We had in this case a lot of very senior people on these teams. And frankly, the developers really liked working that way because there were a lot of birds of the feather, people that understood their same problems. And to some degree, it was the status quo. Everything was working, product was being created. So the questions would come up around, well, why should we fix this? Why should we change this structure? But some of the cons that were against it were the problems that we wanted to solve, and that teams didn't really own customer problems. POs and PMs had a very difficult time prioritizing each backlog, like you heard before. They had to follow each requirement through multiple teams to get things done. In effect, if you sort of took a step back, it really ended up working much like having one big team where there were so many cross-team meetings and so much coordination needed to get anything done. The teams really weren't functioning independently. It was convenient and sort of from an organizational standpoint, but not very convenient from a product creation standpoint. So what do we do? You can go to the next slide. The concept was T-shaping the teams. Product teams organized by product groups with broad and deep. That's what the T-shape stands for, capabilities. And you can just build it out. Slide, Chris. But there's a product owner with multiple disciplines on each team. Each team could produce multiple different products because they had all the skills that they needed. And some of the great outcomes were this. Well, the first outcome was maybe just learning, which was you can't just reorganize your teams without giving people opportunities to train. Obviously, the skill levels differ, when you reorganize teams. So you have to bring certain people's depth in that T-shaped structure up to speed to be able to produce and release. We had to spend some time actually building up, teams that were able to create products. But then once we did, they really owned customer problems. They could look ahead into the future and sort of predict where the roadmap was going to go or predict what the customers might need way better than they could when they were on functional teams. And so the outcome of that was better roadmap visibility, mostly independent. Obviously, there's some coordination needed to produce releases and to manage, dates and schedules and things like that. So there were product councils and Scrum of Scrum type meetings that helped to coordinate that. But at the end of the day, the biggest outcome was just velocity. After this change to the T-shaped teams, there was a noticeable increase in velocity in terms of customer value being delivered. And that was measured through user story creation and how quickly those are retired, which was a great outcome. And the future that these teams are looking at is maybe even taking it one step further by organizing around specific user personas. That's one quick case study, and I'll just present one more. And then I just call this one the CPO. Similar size company, growth stage, but a little bit of a different business case. In this case, the product team was really overloaded. They had kind of outgrown their startup and into growth phase organization, and the other teams were kind of taking over building products. And so when customers or the investors would come and ask about the long-term vision, it was really kind of fragmented. And you can kind of build this slide out also, Chris. While they had all these great inputs, product management really owned a little stovepipe, and other teams started to spring up and create products, whether it was a services team or other organizations just kind of found a business need and began to spin up products on their own. The architecture team would ship their own products and so forth. And really what was happening was there wasn't anyone who owned that vision. There wasn't a person that could come in and kind of look at all these processes and gather them together. There were just a lot of teams that were really functioning independently to try to get the work done. And so what this company did, and you can kind of go to the next slide, is they created a CPO organization, which, just a simple diagram, but the CPO and the product team that he ran owned, all product strategy, vision, and roadmap, encompassing both architecture and all other products that were created. Simple roll up in this case, but this gave the teams the ability to actually plan out that vision, plan out the roadmap, and be able to articulate it to customers, and actually set a strategy going forward. And so, two quick examples of organizing product teams for different but similar business outcomes. And I will end my 5-minute presentation and hand it off to the next person.
Thanks, Pete. And our last speaker before the panel is Bruce McCarthy.
Thanks, Charlie. So for those of you who know me, you will know that this is not a picture of me. I'm Bruce McCarthy. I'm President Emeritus of BPMA, which means President Not Anymore. And I'm also the founder of Product Culture. I work with product teams all over the world on their product management, product development, roadmaps, OKRs, and product team structure. So I want to talk a little bit about product team structure and a little bit about the underlying culture of successful product teams. And I'm starting with my friend Gibson Biddle, who this is a picture of, who is or was vice president of product for Netflix, the company that we all know, and especially these days, love. And I co-hosted a workshop with him in Lisbon where we talked a lot about product strategy. And Gibson is a genius at strategy. He's the guy that put Netflix on the map. But I don't think that's, if you ask Netflix, the company, what their real secret sauce is. Chris, if you go to the next slide, the real secret sauce is actually their culture. This is what they say. Actually, this is a screenshot from a deck you can find on SlideShare that they've made very public, where they say, our culture is what drives our success and ensures our success for many generations of technology and people. It's about how we do things. It's not about exactly what are we doing at any given time, exactly who is on or off the staff right now, exactly which technologies we're using. It's about the underlying culture. Chris, if you'll go to the next slide. And I've been making kind of a study actually of lots of different companies and the elements that go into their culture. Lots of big companies and small companies that I've worked for or with over time. I've worked at small companies and medium-sized growth stage companies like Catherine and Sharon and Pete described. And I've worked at big companies. I even worked at Oracle for a little while, like Charlie described as well. And I think there really are three fundamental ingredients to a proper product culture. If you're going to bake a product culture, these are the three things that you need. So if you go to the next step in the build, Chris, the first thing you need is not just any product vision, but a compelling picture of a future where amazing people do awesome things. It really needs to be focused on people and empowering those people and making them feel that you're behind them, supporting them 100%. And the next step, Chris, you also need, seems obvious, a plan, but not just any plan. I think you need a very deliberate ladder of opportunities to follow step by step to realize that ultimate vision. Very often it's not possible or wise to spend enough time to try to build the perfect product or the perfect vision of the future in one go. And so you need to get there step by step. And then the third one, and the one I want to focus on tonight, is the team. The team needs to really be successful, to be one of these unicorns that we constantly are reading about. The base of that success is a group of people dedicated to reaching that vision. And this wording here about dedication, I think, is very deliberate. It's not just that they need to be talented. It's not just that they need to be hardworking. It's not just that they need to have the right expertise. It's that dedication to reaching the vision that really makes the difference. Chris, if you'll go to the next slide. It's the team, and the next slide too. I want to talk actually about one of our other guests tonight. I want to talk about a conversation that I had with Evan Ryan at Wayfair. This is a picture from Wayfair's advertising. Ryan's team is actually in charge. I'm going to talk for you, Ryan, and hopefully you'll correct anything I get wrong later on in the panel. But according to the conversation I had with Ryan, his team is in charge of all the imagery of all the products that you see on Wayfair's home furnishings website and app and any materials that they have. And they're dedicated, that entire team, quite a few people. I think he said between people who solid line and dotted line report to him, it's about 150 people. It's a mix of product managers, designers, and data analysts, and all sorts of people whose job it is to make sure that the images are as compelling as possible across all of those different sales channels and support channels that Wayfair has. And what I found really interesting, though, is that his team is not measured on how many images they produce or how high quality the images are, or even outcome measures like what's the level of engagement with those images. His team is actually measured on outcome-based metrics for the business, like add to cart ratios. That is the number of people who see an image that then go on to put that the product that's an image of into their shopping cart, or conversion rates or return rates, especially if the returns are, for example, because the product didn't appear as advertised when it was shipped. even product ratings. Those are the measures of success for his team. And his title isn't imagery manager or design manager or even product manager. His title is general manager. He is the general manager of all of imagery across all of Wayfair. And his peers are other general managers of things that are a little bit easier to understand, like the armchair or the sofa category within the business. And their measures of success are obvious, like how many sofas did we sell, and what's the margin, and what's the return rate. So he's being judged on those same sorts of business outcomes as his peers, as the other general product line managers at Wayfair. Chris, if you go to the next slide. I see this as part of a general evolution in the maturity of product teams. And I see the stories that Catherine and Sharon and Charlie and Pete told as very much following this same kind of progression. If you think about it, a lot of teams, if you go back in time, and the first teams that the before scenario that Catherine and Sharon described, and the before scenario in Pete's first case, were work teams. That is, teams consisting of experts in a particular technology or a particular thing that they do for the company. And the measure of their success is that tickets are done. So you have the back end team, the front end team, the database team, and they get tickets and they do the work, and they get rewarded. They get judged based on how quickly they get the tickets done. And those kinds of teams are generally led by the most experienced expert in that discipline, who can presumably advise that team of other experts how to do that job well. Chris, if you go to the next slide. I asked myself, and Catherine and Sharon and Charlie and Pete, they all asked themselves, well, why are we doing this work? We're doing this work because we got to get something delivered, a project, a set of features, something delivered to either an internal team or to a customer. So the next layer up here is cross-functional teams that consist of, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, yeah, thanks, Chris. The next layer up from work is these cross-functional project teams that incorporate the back end, the front end, the database, et cetera, all the different components. And their measure of success is that features are actually shipped as planned, on budget and on time. And generally, this kind of thing can be led by a project manager or a program manager, as Catherine described. Now, moving on to the next one, you got to ask yourself, why are we doing, going in the wrong, yeah, okay. Why are we doing this project? Well, the next layer up after doing a project is, why are we doing the project? Well, the reason we're doing the project is because we have a product, and that product is aimed at solving customer problems, meeting customer needs, or customer jobs to be done, for example. And so we do the work, we deliver the project or the feature or the UX change or whatever it is in order to make the customer successful. And that's then the measure of success is that the customers are actually happy. That's moving into the realm of customer satisfaction and hopefully ultimately renewal rate. And this is the place where it sounds to me like Catherine and Sharon and Pete all were trying to get to, where you had a cross-functional team that was not just there for a temporary project to get features out, but there to make the customer successful by solving their problems and getting ahead of the roadmap, as Pete described. This is where traditionally, I think product managers leading have been the most successful, because they are looking at it from the point of view of the customer and bringing the message of what the customer needs to be successful into the organization. But Evan is leading the charge, along with a number of other organizations I'm familiar with, to the next level up, which is, we're not just here to do the work, we're not just here to deliver the features, we're not just here to make the product solve the customer problem, but we're here to get to a business outcome. We're here to drive the success of our product as a business, or our part of the overall product in the case of Evan's job at Wayfair. And the measure of success here is that the business objectives, like conversion rates, like add to cart rates, like renewal rates, in the case of a SaaS business, are actually achieved. And this new role, that is a grown-up version of a product manager, but with these additional business outcome responsibilities, very often seems to be emerging, is called a GM. Evan's not the only one. Wayfair is not the only one. They have a similar role that runs a number of divisions at TripAdvisor. They have a similar role that runs a number of product lines at HubSpot, here in just to name 3 Boston area companies already. And if you'll go to the next slide, Chris, this begins to suggest a somewhat broader definition of the word product. The word, if we think of the product as, you know, this piece of hardware, or an app that runs on this piece of hardware, well, then it may be difficult for the product manager or this outcome-based team to really take total ownership of the success of the thing. But if you, instead of thinking of your product as a thing, you think of it as a means to an end, the end being you've changed something in the world, you've changed something for the customer, and you've changed something for your business, you've gotten results for both of those, well, then you're playing in the realm of my friend Radhika Dutt, who's writing a book right now called Radical Product, about the idea of how you make products that change the world. Next slide, Chris. I want to give you another example of a company that operates this way. A lot of people say, well, this kind of GM thing, sure, it's great for really big companies. I'm sure Charlie could do it at Oracle if he had the organizational support. It's sure they can do it at Wayfair and at HubSpot. But I want to talk about this company. This is a Finnish company called Supercell. And they organize all of their product teams into no more than 5 to 7 people. And those teams are entirely responsible for a product and its business success. That company, Supercell, makes mobile games like Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, Boom Beach, some of the most commercially successful mobile games ever. And they were bought a few years ago by Chinese investors for about $10 billion after being named by their investors the fastest growing game company in the world. Now, paradoxically, this guy in this picture, Ilkka Paananen, calls himself the weakest CEO in the world, because the only direction he gives to his teams is make a great game. And those teams of 5 to 7 people get together, a product manager, a designer, an artist, a marketer, and some engineers, and they design a game. And if they like the game, then they release it to the other employees. And if the employees like the game, they release it to the Canadian App Store. And if the Canadian App Store likes it and buys it and uses it, then they release it internationally. So you don't need to have an enormous team or enormous resources. You can own a whole software business as a team of 5 to 7 if you follow the advice of these guys, the example of these guys. Next slide. We can move on to the next one too. Now, maybe again, this sounds like science fiction. Gee, it would be great if we could operate this way, but of course we really can't. And I do run into executives that I talk to that, next slide, Chris, that say, you know what, our process already takes too long. If you build the all 4 of these stickies, we have too many ideas to execute on. We're spreading our resources too thin. We're already moving as fast as possible. We're shipping, but nothing's happening. We're already falling behind. And Chris, if you'll click next again. And what I describe when I say we want to give teams full responsibility for the business outcomes begins to sound like I'm adding more steps to the process. I'm adding upfront research. I'm adding measuring results. I'm adding iteration into a process that already takes too long, and we're already falling behind. This is what I think Catherine and Sharon and Charlie and Pete were talking about when they were talking about efficiency. Engineering teams, they seem to often have this bias toward efficient use of resources, expert resources, when in fact, this kind of linear, we're going to build and hope for the best, and we're going to keep on building in a ticket-wise fashion is actually less efficient. Go to the next slide. What I'm actually advocating, when you go all the way up that hierarchy I described to an outcome-based team, is you start a much simpler and more direct process of starting by identifying the business outcomes you want, and then you can play out the rest of these stickies. Identifying the problems that need to be solved in order to achieve those outcomes as a cross-functional team, brainstorming solutions that might solve those problems, that might drive those outcomes, and then iterating, yes, testing those solutions until those outcomes are met, and doing it with one team all the way from left to right. Next slide. Speed is greater than efficiency, is my point here. Efficient use of resources is only good if you know exactly what you're going to build and exactly what the results are going to be. And since building software, at least building it the first time, is an inherently uncertain thing, then speed in getting to the outcomes requires a cross-functional, seemingly less efficient approach. Next slide, Chris. For me, the proof of this is Stefano Portu, the CEO of Shopfully, this company I worked with last year. They had an organization organized very much like the before pictures that Catherine and Sharon and Pete all described. It was very functionally oriented. All the teams owned different components of the stack, and they had layers of product managers, program managers, and architects and committees that coordinated the action of all of these and approved the priorities and the staffing and the architecture and the security procedures and so on. And they were paralyzed by all the overhead of communication that created in order to generate alignment. We reorganized their entire team structure to give each team something to own as a business line. They ended up basically breaking the company into 3 divisions, giving those divisions something like a general manager in charge of it, with product managers and engineering resources and marketing resources of their own to go to market. And the result was, not only did growth resume to levels that they hadn't seen in a while, but Stefano being really enthusiastic about the result in the morale within his organization, in the culture within the organization. I think that's my last slide, Chris, is that right? Yep, just the summary slide of the 3 main components of the recipe, and the most important one at the bottom being the team. So that's all I have to present this evening. I think at this point, Charlie, if it makes sense to you, we should go to the audience questions in Slido and pose them to our panelists.
Indeed. Thank you, Bruce. So at this point, we've been in for an hour, so make sure you take a stretch break if that's going to help you out. If you need to take 5 minutes off, do whatever and come back, that's great too. Go to slido.com, code P287, look at the questions other folks have asked, upvote the ones you're interested in, add things, and Bruce will be referencing that. And just to give you a preview, at 8:30, we're going to switch over to Remo and do some networking. So, think about what you need. If you want to take a break now and come back for networking, that's great. If you want to go to Slido and ask your questions or upvote other people's questions, that's great. Participate however makes sense for you. And we're going to launch into the panel. So if all the speakers for the panel could turn your video on and unmute, we can get started.
Great. While we're waiting for everybody to settle and for more questions to come in on Slido, we already have several, which is great. I actually want to give Evan a chance to correct any misstatements I made about Wayfair and about his team, or did I give a fair assessment of how you guys operate?
No, thanks for asking, Bruce, and thanks for the good overview. I was shocked at how well you were able to recreate the discussion. So, I think we can dig into a little bit more detail in some of the questions, but generally, yes. Wayfair, as I'm sure a lot of the other companies you mentioned, whether it's HubSpot or TripAdvisor, or HubSpot, or others, not even in the Boston area, that have tried various different product structures. I would say at Wayfair, and I've only been there for 3 years, but I would say we've tried and failed at a lot of different things and finally got to the point where we started to be more outcome based. So the general structure is right, but I will say that even now, as we've restructured a lot of the org around that model, we're still continuing to evolve and change that as we go. So I think ultimately that's the current structure, but we learn new things every quarter as we work together and then tweak that model as we go. So I think that's going to continue to happen.
So just like Spotify, now that we've said out loud how you guys operate, people will be coming to you for years afterwards saying, oh yeah, the Wayfair model, and you'll be saying, oh yeah, we stopped doing that years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any really cool nicknames or anything like that for the different product teams, but yeah, we'll see what happens there.
All right, cool. All right, we've got a bunch of questions coming in on Slido. So the first one, the one that has the most votes, is still the first one that was submitted by an attendee, by Melissa Appel. This, Charlie, I wonder if you could weigh in on this first one. I'll read it to you. It's when managing other product managers, how do you know when to do things yourself versus coaching folks on your team to do those things? Given your focus on talent and on giving people stretch opportunities, I thought you might have a point of view on that one.
Sure, yeah, Bruce. I'd say this comes a lot down to trusting your team and who you have in place to do things, right? I think as you sit down with each product manager and you figure out what they're trying to work on a week-to-week, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter basis and their goals, you've got to give them enough rope to try and execute, and you've got to watch those deadlines. Outcome-based, I think Evan just said, right? So, hey, this is the task that you're on. Here's the outcome we expect when you're done. And then you have to have those frequent check-ins. If you're building a team, you've got to be able to trust the members on your team to scale, right? And I also think it's okay to fail, right? Are you going to take a risk with the most important product pitch, product definition, and leave somebody on their own? No, start smaller, right? Try out something that's a little easier to get going first. Give them the ability to show confidence in delivering those things, and then build toward the bigger and bigger deliverables. And we do that through exposure to senior management as well. You can tell when a product manager's got confidence when you're having them present to senior management and to directors and VPs, and they're nailing it. That's just growing confidence, time over time.
Right. So you want to give them those opportunities, but you want to be a little bit thoughtful, I think is what I hear you saying about which opportunities. Take a sort of a moment to assess whether, okay, has this person got this? Are they confident in it? Or could they use some support? Is this not one of those stretch opportunities?
Yep. We talk about earn trust, give trust as one of our values, right?
Right.
Give them opportunities to keep earning that trust that they can deliver, do the frequent check-ins, and then give them the trust to deliver later.
Anybody else on the panel have anything to add to that, to what Charlie said about that question on doing it yourself versus letting your product manager team take the lead?
Well, I can speak to managing engineers rather than project managers, but I think the overall strategy is the same. You have to take risks with the people working on your team. You have to coach them to do some of the bigger projects, because if you don't, you'll never be able to scale. And you'll find that the effort and time that you spend in reviewing plans, in coaching senior members of your team, it really allows you to get way more done than if you took on each project. Taking on a project actually takes your eye off the ball of coaching your team
Right.
achieve higher capability.
Right. Okay. Let's.
One thing,
Uh,
just one thing I would add is sort of a little bit of a another side of the coin is that if I do think it's important that sometimes to do some projects yourself, because it sort of shows that you're willing to roll up your sleeves and take on a bit of the work and set an example and be a role model and all of that sort of thing as well. So there are times every once in a while to really dig in and do some of that work yourself. I believe.
because you don't trust the team, but because you want to keep your hand in. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and show that you're contributing and give and set, provide some examples and that sort of thing as well.
Right. Evan, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, we call that at Wayfair the manager-doer attitude, right? So, if you are somebody that's managing other product managers or managing a team, obviously you're going to be thinking about the strategy and leveling things up and making sure you're thinking about not just the next quarter or two or next roadmap version of your roadmap, but actually thinking 2 or 3 years out. And as you do that, you want to give those responsibilities, as Charlie mentioned, to the junior folks on your team to own work streams and really make a difference. But at the same time, you should be able to go deep on any of those things as a manager doer and dive into any of those projects when needed. And I think the last thing I would say is that, part of this is also an organizational design thing as well, right? So if you're building a product team and you own a set of customer problems, you're going to want to structure that out in your planning when you're defining your vision, you're defining your goals in a way that you can have different product managers owning different parts of those goals and owning the different customer problems. And then as you level yourself up and you gain trust, like Charlie mentioned, and you prove that you can execute, then you should be able to step back and do more of the strategy and make sure that those work streams are managed by trusted, more junior folks on your team. So I think you can start to organize that intentionally through your org design as you think about how you're going to build and expand your team, assuming you continue to grow the product in the right way.
Well, speaking of org design, the next question actually is how do you encourage camaraderie on your product team when you've got your product managers all spread out among all these different responsibilities? If you've got them organized by persona, as Pete was contemplating, for example, or you've got them organized by part of the product, or as in your case, Evan, where you've got the imagery ownership, but somebody else has the ownership over the sofas. I could easily see, and I have seen in many teams where the product managers never talk to each other. How do we deal with that, or do we deal with that? Does it even matter?
Are you targeting that at me or just opening up to the group?
I got you in front of me, so you're stuck with that, trying to answer that question.
Great. And I think, so this is such an important piece. I think and Bruce, maybe this gets back to your point about product culture, right? You're talking about the different components of product culture, but at the end of the day, this is how do we get people to work together and to enjoy working together and to really have passion for the problems that they're solving. And part of that is making sure that they have connections to other teams outside of their own work groups. And at a place like Wayfair, it's big enough where as the product group grows, and you might have different product groups. We talked about some structures where you have a front-end team, and a back-end team, and an app team, et cetera, et cetera. I think that can work in certain situations, but ultimately, if you want to build a strong product culture, not just within a group, but across the organization, you have to develop systems, methodologies, and opportunities for those product managers to connect outside of their everyday work. So at Wayfair, we do a lot of things with, we do obviously pod outings and sort of culture building activities, but then we also do huge product org related presentations. We do a lot of learning and development and lunch and learns around different aspects of the things that people are working on. So we have presentation opportunities. We do a lot of mixers with different product groups and engineering groups that get together, even data science, and make sure that you have constant opportunities to connect with other teams. And then also we do these things, which I think is interesting as well. We almost call them like a study abroad, right? So if you're a product manager, you're working on a project, you've been doing that for 1.5 years. At Wayfair, we give product managers and engineers the opportunity to go jump into another team for a 3-month project as a study abroad. And actually, we tend to encourage those folks to jump into a team that they already work with, but don't know enough about, right? So the work is tangential, and it's key to the projects they're working on, but to allow them to dig into the actual problems or into the actual code gives them an opportunity to not only connect with other folks, but also learn about the actual products that are being built in those areas.
And there's some cross training at the same time.
Right.
Cool. Charlie says that he has some thoughts on this particular question. Charlie, you want to go?
Yeah, I'd say that I love that idea, the jumping in the other areas as well. And I think one of the questions I saw floating around was, how do you measure a good performing team? If you've got team members that can jump between teams and have an impact, that's a great way to know you have somebody that's a high performer. We try to use some common regular tasks as well to keep building camaraderie, and it's work, but it's not work. So, if you're going after things like, your Gartner ratings for the year and you're doing your surveys, there's projects you can do across all the product manager teams where you can create that interaction. You can assign different people leads so they have to work with the other teams, right? And I think that's the way that I kind of, almost on a quarterly basis, we create something that's across every team that's got to get done. It could be UI rework, it could be a Gartner type.
Common mission, right? A common enemy almost.
And it forces that product manager to not just go ask other product managers for answers, but they have to go interact with the other engineering teams and get it done. And we do it through goal setting too, on a quarterly and yearly basis. We try to use OKRs best we can. And everybody starts to share and kind of rally around, what do we need to get done as a team? And how do we move the entire product suite and the entire business forward? So we use that goal setting methodology as well to build it.
Right. Pete, I was wondering if you presented a sort of a before and after that moved from a more fragmented world into a very product-oriented, not functional, but product-oriented structure. Did you have a problem in making that change where product managers felt isolated from each other?
Yeah, a little, because they're used to that structure where they were highly matrixed, basically having to run around between every team to get a product feature created. And so they felt like they lost a little bit of knowledge in certain domain areas as they had to specialize on one product instead. But I was even thinking of a more extreme example in a very, very large organization that I worked with in the past, where product teams were in completely different business units, and the ways that they would come together were interesting. I mean, they all were to some degree looking for the same kind of like edge. What's the greatest tool I can use? What's the greatest KPI that I can use? All these process questions, and or just simple things like, how do you build your roadmap? What is let's share like your techniques on how you actually articulate your strategy and things like that. I found those kind of conversations from one product manager to another, even though they're in completely different domains, were always really useful. And even if it was just like, hey, can I have your presentation? Those sorts of conversations were great to facilitate between very disparate product teams.
That's great. Anything to add, Catherine or Sharon, from that same journey that you guys made?
Yeah, sure. No, I think a lot of what others have said makes a lot of sense. And I think trying to generate camaraderie amongst the product managers in terms of what are the best practices that they're using, also sharing templates, like how are we going to articulate our roadmap to others? How are we going to present it to others? How are we going to prioritize things? Thinking through how you might do that for your particular product and for your particular squad, as we have at CMT. But sharing a lot of that, and collaborating on it is really important. And we actually have a book club. So we pick a book that we sort of read every couple of weeks. We get together, we talk about it sort of in terms of best practices from our product management. And so that's been a good way to kind of share experiences and generate some camaraderie.
Cool. One of the questions I think that's in the next layer down of questions that I think is closely related is, it says you have multiple teams owning their roadmaps in parallel. How do you coordinate what ships when? Who decides how? And how does marketing plug in? So if you've got these teams working independently in parallel, we talked about coordination in terms of technical coordination, but how does the go to market? How does the release coordination and the marketing messaging get coordinated? Any thoughts on that from anybody on the panel?
Yeah, I can jump in because I think this is actually related to the outcome piece as well. So, I think, there's a couple of questions that are related to this, right? So it's, how can you coordinate and not work in silos, and how do you not do that just amongst product teams, but also among other business teams like marketing? I think first and foremost, this is for us about the road mapping phases, right? And, I'm a little biased when it comes to road mapping, but, we do this on a quarterly basis, and we start road mapping even 6 weeks before the end of the quarter that we're in, and start, meeting with those teams. And if I'm, if let's just say I'm a product owner, my job is to create a roadmap for the goals that we have for the next couple of quarters, but I'm sharing that with all of my counterparts as I go. And so any of the other product teams that, again, are working alongside me or have something to contribute to the end product for what we're all creating at a larger level, I want to make sure my roadmap aligns very well with all of their roadmaps, so that if I have dependencies, all those teams know what I'm doing. We all agree on the priorities and goals together. And then I think the question around how do you get all the other teams that are more business oriented to coordinate with that, it's the same thing, right? It's, instead of just meeting with product managers, I'm meeting with business stakeholders and other parts of the organization. So the marketing teams, the data science teams, the business intelligence teams, to make sure that everybody understands what my goals are, and then we can all collaborate effectively to plan each one of our initiatives and releases around the larger business goals. So I think that's what puts us as a company into the outcome-based structure that we are in now, is that desire and need for larger coordination across different business units.
Anybody on the panel have a different answer than Evans?
Yes, I'm thinking back towards what I said about all of our squads having a balance of autonomy and oversight. And it works reasonably well up to a point to have all the various product owners and program managers and engineering leadership of the squads talk together. But oftentimes there is resource needs that need to be escalated. And Catherine and I actually found that without senior leadership review, sometimes the squad's priorities got a little bit out of alignment with our strategic initiatives. So I would say, yes, it's great for the independent teams to work things out. And you also need periodic, even every sprint, review with the folks who have the higher level strategic view. And so you can kind of pull the teams back into alignment and work out any issues that might crop up that can't be resolved between peers. So that's why the council idea is very powerful for us.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I think we probably can't get away without answering the question, how do you define or measure a high-performing team? That's in the next bunch down. And we've been talking all night about, how to, but then how do you know if you succeeded? What is the measure of a high-performing team? I have my private answer that I will save, but I would love to hear from anybody on the panel. Charlie, why don't you jump in and tell us what you think?
You go first, huh?
Yep.
So with the way we measure our teams, there's, I'd say, a few different standards that we go against. We do use the OKRs. So there is a, hey, you set your goals for the year. What were those goals? What did they go against? Some are business related because we know what the roadmap is and we know the definitions and the classical product management tasks that have to be there. Some are stretch, where we look at things like cross-service adoption, and we'll put goals into the product management team where we want to see an improvement of cross-service adoption, or a factor like usability. How much faster could a user sign up for service XYZ? And we'll make the product manager directly responsible for figuring out a way to get that done. It's not always a success or fail at the end. It's, did you improve it? Did it get better? And so we measure that way. And the other kind of non-metric based that we use, that collaboration we do with the engineering team is so key. You can ask that engineering leader directly for incremental feedback throughout the year, and they're going to give you that honest assessment of this guy's killing it, or they're not doing what we need. And that's that personal performance side of they're making a difference for that engineering team or not.
Pete, how do you measure?
Yeah, Bruce, I think I know where you would go with outcomes, and I love Evan's response about owning a business metric. I think those are great. Those are when you reach, I think, a certain level of evolution in your organization and process, you can start to have those sort of tier level goals. But for a lot of teams that are still emerging, it's very hard to give them that kind of a metric or a measurement to go against, because they're just too far away from the problem at the stage of evolution that they're at. They'll get there over time, but maybe they just formed a team and they're trying to figure out how do we measure our output. So the next closest proxy to an outcome metric is some kind of value metric. Can I create some kind of customer value? Sales goals were extremely hard to do for a product team, because your pricing might vary, or it might be a free service or something like that. So the next closest is, are people actually using what you produced? And so I like to think about, if I'm shipping features, what's the rate of adoption of those features? How many customers did I provide some value to? And so instead of just measuring, did the feature ship, or did the team ship a product, how many people are using that product? What was the growth in that usage over time? And that generally is a proxy for value, whether it's revenue or some other kind of aspect. It's an easy way to kind of start before you evolve to more outcome-based or business KPI-based performance metrics.
I love the way you framed that up as well. If you're not quite that close to it, or if it's a sales metric that you don't feel you can control, or that takes a long time to play out, well, maybe there are proxy metrics or leading indicators that you can use that what you're doing is creating some value. That makes a lot of sense. And that, in my sort of hierarchy, that would be at the product level, even if you can't quite connect to the outcome level yet.
Exactly.
Catherine, I'm curious about your definition.
Yeah, so I would agree probably with Peter in the sense that we think a lot about customer satisfaction. We think a lot about adoption, like you were saying, user engagement. So one of our overall company metrics is how many users do we have on our platform, and thinking through if we add these new features or new capabilities, new products even, how much greater is our user engagement and our number of users as a result of that. So that's a pretty key metric for us. I do think we really try to put some stakes in the ground in terms of release dates, and really focus on trying to achieve those. And then finally, I would say just another really important thing for CMT is just innovation. So how many sort of new innovative things are we working on and able to put out, as prototypes and things like that we can test in the market. So those are some of the things that we think about.
Awesome. All right, we have 1 minute left before Charlie is going to kick us out. So let's just go around the room really quick, and everybody name the one book you recommend to other product managers. I'll start it off. Right now, the book I'm recommending, I have a lot of favorite books on my website, but the book I'm recommending right now is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Not only is it sorry, Steve, did I steal yours? Not only is it a great book for product managers in general, but in it, he talks about the difference between being on a wartime footing versus a peacetime footing. And I think Ben would say that he'd think of today as a wartime footing. And you have to take decisive action. As long as I have you on my screen, Catherine, what's your pick?
Yeah, so a book that we've read recently in our product management sort of reading group is Product Management in Practice by Matt LeMay. And we just found it to be just a very practical approach. His examples and his experiences really resonated with a lot of the people in our team, and his ways of dealing with these different situations. Particularly, I think one of the challenges with product management is that you're trying to influence people to achieve things, and yet they don't report to you. And so how do you communicate, how do you collaborate, and how do you influence and drive real enthusiasm and as a result productivity for what what you're trying to get these engineers in particular to build. So I really enjoyed that book.
Super quick, Sharon, do you second Catherine's recommendation, or have you got something else you wish all the product managers you work with would read?
I'm going to go with an oldie but goodie and say good to great, because it really
Yep.
speaks to me about management style and someone who, and a philosophy of building a pipeline of leaders rather than having one, charismatic leader who, when they go away, the whole company goes away.
Good one. Charlie, would you second that one, or have you got one of your own?
One of my own. I took over a UX and UI team recently, so I did user friendly. It's the hidden rules of design are changing the way we live, work, and play. Cliff Klang, Robert Fabricant, and just a really insightful look back at industrial design, how it impacts product, and everything that's happening. And I would recommend everybody has an Audible membership as well.
Yes, definitely. Pete, have you got a recommendation?
Yeah, I do, Bruce. You took mine. I would have said Ben Horowitz's book. I tell everybody that all the time. If you know me, it's like the unbusiness book. That's why I like it so much. But I think as a baseline, a lot of the questions that are in the Slido polls here, if you read Inspired by Marty Kagan, it really answers all these. It's like the product management primer. I don't think it's it may not be the most compelling read like the Ben Horowitz book, but I think it sets a really great baseline just so you can understand the function, the discipline, the roles, the career path. I find that super valuable just as a common language book to start off with. And so, it's an easy read, and I think everybody would get something out of it.
I agree. That one's on my list too. Awesome. Well, thank you, panel. Great discussion. Really happy to get all these brains together for these questions. Charlie, what are we doing next?
Do I get to give my book as well? This is Evan.
Oh, Evan, I'm sorry. I don't know how I missed you. Please give your book.
No worries. I'll make it quick. So for me, it's all about the people. I recently read a book that I loved, and I love this guy. Author Simon Sinek wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last. So if you've had a chance, if you haven't had a chance, I definitely recommend that. It's a lot about not treating people like numbers on a spreadsheet, but actually developing a sense of autonomy and camaraderie in everything you do, and really, trusting the people that you work with. So,
great recommendation. I read Start With Why by Simon Sinek, one of my favorite books ever. I've just written down that recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone on the panel. I've written down all of these book recommendations, and I'm going to send them in the post-event email that you're all going to get. So you'll have this list handy to read all these recommended books. So as we mentioned over and over again, we're going to have networking starting real soon via the online tool Remo. So we really encourage you to check it out. And for that, you're going to be able to turn your video and audio on, sit at a virtual table, aim to sit at a table with 3 or 4 people, I would say. And if you can't figure out what to talk about, Slido's full of great topics that you all want to talk about if you want to reference something.
How do we get there? What do we do?
Yeah, so Chris, can you click the next slide? Yeah, so quick plug, we have another event in April, Product Manager for that Startup Life. Check that out on our website, bostonproducts.org. And here is the Remo link. We just stuck it in the chat for the WebEx. It is also in your event confirmation email. Make sure to turn on your mic and video. And next slide. We also have a post-event survey we'd really love you to fill out. Tell us what we did well, what we could do better. We're probably going to have virtual events for some time, so we really want to hear from you. What worked, what didn't, how can we do this better? What topics do you want to hear about? What formats would be useful? So we'll stick, the event survey is now in the WebEx chat as well, and you'll get an email with that too. Please fill it out. And then if you want to get involved with BPMA in any way, whether that's to join our mailing list, become a mentor or a mentee in our program, or volunteer with us, or join our product executives forum if you're a VP or a similar level at your company, you can access that via this short Google form, which is also in the chat. And all these things will be in your post-event email as well. So please join us on Remo. Find a table and have 3 or 4 people, turn your camera and audio on, and get networking. See you there.
Awesome.
Also, this will be recorded, and we're going to make the recording available. So you'll be able to forward it to anybody you know who wasn't able to attend. who you think might benefit from this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. See you on the other side.